from Mitchell Hall at the University of Delaware. This is Delaware Debates.
Welcome. On behalf of Delaware Public Media and the University of Delaware Center for Political Communication, I want to welcome you to Delaware Debates 2016. This debate is made possible with the financial support from AARP Delaware and also with support from the American Cancer Society, Cancer Action Network, and the William P. Frank Foundation of Delaware. I'm Nancy Karabjanian, and I am joined for this conversation and this debate tonight by questioners including University of Delaware Chair of Political Science and International Relations, Dr. David Redlosk. Welcome. And also Delaware Public Media political reporter James Dawson. Thank you, James. The candidates in this race for the U.S. House include Democrat Lisa Blunt Rochester, welcome, and Republican Hans Reigle, welcome to you as well. Now, this debate will be divided into two parts. Following a 1-minute opening statement from each of you, we will pose questions to you, and you will each have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer those questions, and then a 1-minute rebuttal from the other candidate. We will then have a follow-up discussion in which there is no time cues. You may discuss among yourselves. We may interject as well at that point. The second part of our debate will include questions that are posed by the students of the University of Delaware and Delaware State University. And this year, we also have questions submitted online by members of the public. This section, your responses are limited to 1 minute. We will also give you 1 minute for a closing statement. Our live audience here at Mitchell Hall, they know that they are not to interrupt this debate with applause or any noise during this debate. And we did hold a coin toss prior to determine the order. And with that, we will begin with the first opening statement for 1 minute from Lisa Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Nancy. And good evening. Good evening to the viewers and everyone in the audience, and thank you to the sponsors. I began this journey a little over a year ago on the anniversary of the passing of my husband, Charles Rochester. And that loss really sunk in with me. But when I opened up my eyes and saw there were so many other people in our state who were dealing with the loss of a job, or maybe the loss of a home during the economic crisis, or even the loss of a loved one due to gun violence, I realized that I really needed to step up instead of sit back. In addition to that, I walked around this state all these past 10 months hearing from Delawareans, and the things that they shared with me are that, number one, our platform of focusing on jobs and the economy is what is important to Delawareans, and that they want leaders who are going to come together, work together, roll up their sleeves to find common sense solutions, and that's what I want to be for Delaware. So I ask for your vote, and I'm looking forward to this evening's debate. 1 minute from you.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Hans Reigle. I'm proud to be the Republican congressional candidate for Delaware. I began this journey in January of 2015. I've been a leader my whole adult life. I've been a pilot since I was 19. I was an Air Force pilot. I've flown 12,000 hours, been to over 45 countries, Army pilot, airline captain, educator at Delaware State University, and mayor. I want to be the people's voice in Washington. I want to represent you in Washington. I look forward to this debate this evening where we'll talk about jobs, we'll talk about the national economy, the national debt, and our nation's security. I'm looking forward to it very much, and I'm humbly asking for your vote on November 8th.
We will now move to our first topic, and that is the topic of jobs and the economy. David Redlosk will pose the first question, and that goes to Lisa Blunt Rochester.
Ms. Blunt Rochester, Occupy Wall Street brought income inequality to our attention as the protests focused on the 1% versus the 99%. Because of this, candidates from both parties are now talking about the challenges of making it in America. What role does income inequality play in our country? What, if anything, needs to be done about it?
That's a great question. First of all, I also want to acknowledge that it's good to see this actually being an issue that we're discussing. I don't think we've discussed it before to the extent that we have. It actually plays a great role. It touches our education system. I mean, the fact that people need opportunity and they need to be educated and prepared and a trained workforce to do that. But it also deals with the issues that we've seen with the financial crisis, everything from the greed that we saw that caused a lot of the problems that we see today. In terms of what we can do about it, I think we need to look at our total economy and think about the investments we make in our infrastructure. Those are good jobs that folks can have. In addition to that, we look at our education system and the investment that we make in our education system. So for me, when we look at income inequality, it really is tied to so many things, even systemic racism that we have been talking about as an issue that hasn't been to the fore before as well. And I'm glad that this is something that we're talking about, because this is the thing that has come up most on the campaign trail for me, is jobs, income inequality, and social justice.
Mr. Reigle, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
Yes. I think that there shouldn't be any barriers to stop any kid that's born in America from achieving their dreams. There is income inequality in our country, and we can do better getting jobs for Americans. A lot of businesses and a lot of jobs are hurt by regulation. I think the government needs to step back and create more jobs, and I think that would be a big help to get rid of that income inequality. Just look at downtown Wilmington. I don't think it's a coincidence that there's so much crime down there when we've lost so many jobs. We lost 2 auto plants and a steel plant, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Jobs do equal prosperity, and I think anybody that wants to work and is able-bodied should have no barriers in their way and should be able to get a job.
We're moving into the moderated discussion. You two may answer each other at this point. There are no time cues at this, but we may also prompt you with some topics and issues. If either of my panelists would like to ask a follow-up at that point.
What do you actually say, either of you, what do you say to those who have actually fallen behind, who see little hope of catching up ever again?
Ms. Rochester, we'll put that to you first.
Well, one of the things that I didn't talk about is some of my previous experience, serving as our Secretary of Labor, serving as the CEO of the Metropolitan Urban League in Wilmington. And you asked, what do you say to those individuals who have fallen behind? I think one of the reasons why I'm running, I've had kids actually come up to me during this campaign and first just be surprised that a woman, a black woman, a person who maybe came from the city of Wilmington like they did, is actually running for office. So I think one of the things that you say to folks is that it can be done. Another thing that you say to folks is that there will be isms out there, whether it's racism, sexism, whatever those isms are, but that we have to be conscious of them but not consumed to the point where you can't act and get a good education.
This is discussion, so you
Sure,
may join in.
absolutely. I would say it's time for a change. We've been, under certain leadership for a while in the city of Wilmington, as an example we're talking about, or from Delaware. I mean, I would be going to Congress, and I'm sure we'll talk about the presidential race later, but I would have a seat at the table as a Republican there. I think that it's time for a change. I've been working hard from the age of 15 till now, and I've never had anything handed to me.
Well, let me invite James Dawson to put another issue on the table here.
Yeah, absolutely. So according to the International Trade Administration, the U.S. currently has free trade agreements with 20 countries, which accounted for $1.3 billion, or close to a quarter of Delaware's exports in 2014. What is your position on existing trade deals like NAFTA and any yet to come?
So I absolutely would look at each agreement. Generally speaking, I'm a free market individual. I think in some industries, as I mentioned, I'm an airline captain. In some industries, we do need to have some form of regulation to regulate the markets, like cabotage for the airlines, because that adds a security element to travel. Like Korean Air.
I know it's a big issue, but I do want to make sure that in the time we have left on this topic that Ms. Blunt Rochester can respond.
Absolutely.
I would just say that I am a supporter of trade. I know we live in a global economy, but I want to make clear that it's a supporter of fair trade, not just free trade, and that when we look through and even when we develop these trade deals, that we're looking at things such as human rights, that we're looking at the impact on consumer and consumer protections here in our country, and also making sure that our workers here in America aren't adversely impacted.
We're going to move on at this point to another topic, continuing with the issue of revenue, spending, and the national debt. James Dawson has this next question, and the first to answer will be Mr. Reigle.
Okay.
President Obama inherited a record high federal budget deficit, which has been substantially reduced over his term. But reducing the deficit isn't enough to cut the national debt, which continues to grow. How would you begin paying down the $19 trillion debt? And if you don't want to, why should we not worry so much about it?
I am absolutely concerned about the national debt, because if this keeps going in the same direction it's going in, there won't be an America to protect. There won't be, a lot of these social issues will never get done because there won't be an America. Granted, George Bush doubled the national debt. He started with $5 trillion and ended with 10. That's a fact. When President Obama started, he started with 10 trillion, now it's 20. When I started my campaign, it was $17 trillion national debt, now it's $20 trillion, and my kids each owe about $60,000, and so does everybody in this room. First thing we need to do is we need to get a handle on spending. We need to cut the federal budget by 2%. Well, that doesn't sound like much. Yeah, it's a lot. It's symbolic, and it gets our country moving in the right direction. Also, there needs to be an incentive for federal departments to save money. Right now, the way the money's budgeted in Washington, if you don't spend all your money in your department, you lose it the subsequent year. That's a systemic issue that absolutely needs to be addressed. We need to boost our coffers with more jobs. That's important too. And we absolutely need to make sure, that we fund our military and find some cuts, but we need to have an efficient military.
You have 1 minute for a rebuttal.
I would just share that for me, it's harder to do than to say. And having served as a state personnel director here in Delaware, I know what it's like to have to find $19 million in benefit cuts. And so what we did was actually bring stakeholders around the table, bring all the union leaders around the table and said, we've got a tough choice to make, and I need your help in making that choice. I think that's the kind of thinking and that's the kind of work strategy that's necessary in Washington right now, but that we not just say blanket, we're going to cut 2%, and that might mean dealing with Social Security or child care or some of the issues that are important to us. It really takes a lot of time and effort to go through a budget and see where those cuts can come from, and then it takes a lot of working together with stakeholders to make those cuts actually happen.
We'll move into moderated discussion now. Do you have a point that you would like to add, or I can ask one of our panelists?
Sure. There's a lot of fraud and waste in the government, and I think we need to look at that. There's billions of dollars of waste in the Social Security program right now. I don't want to cut anybody's benefits that deserve the benefits they've earned, but I don't think someone that's passed away and has a bank account and money is still going direct deposit into there and some family members pulling it out, that's not fair to everyone else that's paying taxes. So I think there's room for
It is
improvement.
discussion if you wanted to respond to that.
Great. So what I would share is that while there's fraud and abuse in any industry, I think that for government, again, part of the goal is to really go through and actually work with agencies to understand where we can make improvements. Social Security is a great example. I've had the opportunity to work on helping people with disabilities get into jobs so they wouldn't depend on the benefit. That helps our economy. That also helps the individual. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation.
Did you have a follow-up to this discussion?
Well, when you're talking about budgets and budget cutting and the national debt and the rest of it, one of the interesting things about how Congress seems to operate these days is that funds get approved. For example, Congress just approved some funds to keep the federal government open through Election Day. Money for Zika, Louisiana, Flint have been holding up a temporary spending bill. What will you do, even in this context, to advance spending priorities when they often come with strings attached?
Lisa Blunt Rochester, we'll let you answer first.
Great.
And this is discussion.
Great. You know, one of the reasons I actually decided to run was, in addition to the what of strengthening the economy, was about the how. To me, whether the issue is gun violence, whether the issue is Zika, until we start working together, we're not going to be able to solve any of those issues. And so for me, my focus is also very strongly on the how. Some of that has meant trying to establish relationships. That's one of the things that's really important that I think is missing from the past, is people actually seeing each other as humans and establishing
We have a
relationships.
little bit of time left if you'd like
Sure,
to add.
I've done it. I was the mayor of Wyoming, Delaware. I worked with Democrats, Republicans, and independents to balance the town's budget, improve the town's morale, put in new playground and some roads without raising taxes.
All right, we're going to move on now from the national debt, and we're going to take up another topic that is huge on voters' minds this year, and that is foreign policy, national security, and immigration. James Dawson will pose this question. Ms. Blunt Rochester, you will have the first response.
Relations with Russia have recently deteriorated over the Syrian civil war, with Secretary of State John Kerry saying both countries should be investigated for war crimes. Would you support putting U.S. boots on the ground to stop the violence that's claimed up to 470,000 lives?
You know, while I actually had the opportunity to study international relations right here at the University of Delaware, and so diplomacy is the #1 key for me. I don't support boots on the ground at this point. Neither Hans or I have privy to any of the classified information that others have, but from what I know now, I would not support boots on the ground.
I haven't been to Syria, but I've been to Jordan, Israel, Kuwait, Turkey, a bunch of the countries around it. So I think that gives me a unique security perspective on some of the issues going on there. I would not tie the hands of the U.S. government to not allow a certain military strategy to be put in place. Of course, I think diplomacy is our first choice, you know, military action in a limited fashion. But if the generals, you know, decide they need to do something more severe, if that includes boots on the ground, I'm going to listen to the generals or, you know, the president for that matter.
Well, we're into moderated discussion, but I want to take us to something that's happening right now, because this may be beyond the point of diplomacy and not a direct action by the United States, but with the stepped-up tactics to retake Mosul from ISIS, the U.S. commander on the ground in Iraq warns that this may actually end up prompting new terror targets in retaliation. So do you agree with the stance to support the Iraqi efforts, regardless of the possible consequences to the United States? I'll allow you, Ms. Blunt Rochester, to answer first.
You know, first of all, I have to say that to see the action that's happening right now gives some positive direction. One of the big concerns also is going to be the number of refugees that also leave there. And, you know, so that's going to also be a big major issue. To me, again, I go back to the focus on diplomacy. That, to me, is important. I also think making sure that we are close with our allies is important. So when you look at, you know, someone like Mr. Trump, who thinks that NATO is not the way that we should go, I am supportive of working with our allies in that region and also around the world.
It is discussion, so you may add.
Sure. I think we should support those troops. Whether we should have gone into Iraq initially or not is a subject of its own debate. I wrestled with that question in my mind as well when that decision was made. But we left in a rush, and we kind of created a power vacuum in Iraq, and we're somewhat responsible for helping clear that mess up, in my view. And we did put some more ground troops back in, special forces, advisors, and so on. So I do think it's important that we continue to help the Iraqi government.
So bringing national security back home, on the home front, right? We've seen in the last year several domestic terror attacks, San Bernardino, Orlando, bombings in Manhattan and New Jersey recently. Thinking about that, what can we do to root out homegrown terrorists? What can we do to reach them, perhaps, even before they are radicalized?
Mr. Reigle, you may go first.
Sure. Well, we have to secure our borders. That's a big start. We need to figure out who is in America, and we need to do things like track expired visas. Also, there are some security issues, like I do not believe in sanctuary cities or states. I think they contribute to insecurity, and I'm opposed to those. So that would be something out of the gate.
I also had the opportunity to work in Jordan, and I, through that, actually met some incredible people, but also learned that part of our challenge here is that the rhetoric and how we talk about people is contributing to the reason we're seeing what we're seeing. To me, the hate speech, even coming from a presidential candidate, does not help advance us in the direction of peace at home or abroad. And so, I want to be clear. To me, I think that just like I talked about economic opportunity, that's true for folks here as well, so that people aren't radicalized. That's probably one of the bigger threats to us right now is people feeling disenfranchised right here in our own country. And we can't continue to speak the way we speak and think that we're going to get positive outcomes.
Do you have something you'd like to add to that?
Sure. I was just going to say, ich bin nicht gegen rechtmäßige Einwanderung, which is I'm not opposed to legal immigration. I'm the son of an immigrant. I just want to be clear on that. It's not a hate thing. We need to control our southern border, not only because of folks coming in, but also the threat of nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons coming into our country from unsecure borders. That just terrifies me.
And I'd like to
Very quickly
respond to the sanctuary state thing that he brought up. I want to be clear, too, that a lot of people don't realize, back to your original question, we want people to cooperate with our law enforcement. So if they don't have that fear, then they will cooperate. So safety is number one. And number two, we are a country of people who've come here from around the world, and so that's part of our values.
That takes us to our next topic. Thank you very much. Guns and criminal justice. David Redlosk poses this question to Mr. Reigle.
Mr. Reigle, one thing that makes our country different from most is our approach to private ownership of guns. The Second Amendment guarantees a right to bear arms, but huge majorities of Americans support a range of restrictions on that right. If you are elected, what can Delawareans expect from you when gun restrictions like background checks or assault weapon bans are proposed in Congress?
Well, as you mentioned, that is guaranteed in the Constitution, unlike many of the other things that we're talking about. I totally respect the right of law-abiding citizens to own guns. I think one of the first steps we need to take is to actually prosecute people who shouldn't have guns that have them. I know, and I've talked to lots of prosecutors and attorneys, a lot of times that's the first charge to get dropped. Criminals go after weak people, and they target weak people. That's why they take weapons to places like discos and schools, because they know nobody's there to defend themselves. So something that I think that most people probably, that might set off some alarm bells in regards to security, I actually think if my son had a teacher who was a former police officer, trained officer for years in Florida, was his teacher, I think that teacher should have been allowed to be armed in the classroom. I don't think every teacher should be armed on any level, but a former military policeman that becomes a teacher, a former state trooper, they're like an extra school resource officer that could help the security of the schools.
You have a 1-minute rebuttal.
First of all, I think that it's important that families not have to go to funerals instead of graduations. And so while I am in support of our Second Amendment rights, I think that things have just gotten crazy with guns in our country. And we actually have an 8-point plan that's on our website. And in that, we talk about things such as reinstating the limitation of assault weapons. We talk about closing loopholes. We talk about mental health and making sure that we focus on our mental health system here in Delaware. But this is one of those issues that is touching one too many families, and we have to also stand up to the NRA and others who would try to influence the process through money and intimidation as well. So for me, I believe in a person's right to have a gun, but not an arsenal.
We're in moderated discussion now. I think James Dawson would like to move us forward.
In January, a congressional task force recommended that most mandatory minimum sentences for federal drug offenses be repealed, make any new mandatory minimum sentences temporary, and urge judges to hand out probation for low-level crimes. Would you work to implement those proposals? Why or why not?
Sure. I have a lot of respect for judges, and I think the judge is the best arbiter of each individual case. So I would look at that recommendation. If it shifts more power to the courts, I mean, we have too many rules in my view. I think that the judge of an individual case is the best person equipped to make a decision about that case and whether that person should get locked up for a long time or kind of have a lesser sentence and maybe some rehabilitation or an alternate form of punishment.
This is the discussion portion, so you may address that directly.
I totally would implement that. One of the biggest issues that we're seeing right now is mass incarceration in our country. And when we look at just the trajectory of how many people are now being incarcerated, we're #1 in the world. And part of that is because we've taken discretion away from judges. So for me, I look at that issue, and I also think about the impact that it would have on our economy if people actually, again, had good education, then had a good job, and were contributing to society instead of locked up in prison and all of the money that we're putting in the prison system.
So recent shootings of African American men have resonated nationally. Right? Very simply, what role can the federal government play in building the trust between police and communities at the local level?
We'll let you continue with your thought as you address that point.
But this question hits me both personally and professionally. Personally, I'm a parent who has had to jump out of her bed because my son was stopped by the police in the Edgemoor Community Center. But on the other side, I also have worked in state personnel and was asked by then Governor Minner to investigate our state police for racial discrimination in 2002. And what we did was think about various things that needed to be taken into account. One was acknowledging there's a problem. When we don't acknowledge it, that's part of the problem. 2 was this building trust. 3 was transparency, that there has to be transparency in the things that we do. And 4 was looking for best practices across the country. And 5 was actually holding ourselves accountable when we came up with a plan of action.
You do have the opportunity.
Sure. I would like to support local policing. I think I was a professor at Delaware State University for 7 years. I had a lot of students from the city of Wilmington. They told me about some of the problems there. There needs to be more things, productive things for kids to do. It seems like a lot of that, the funding for that has gone away over time. And, we just have to also, though, just enforce the rule of law.
All right, we're going to move on to our next topic, and our next topic is the issue of health care and other entitlement programs. David Redlosk will be posing this question to Lisa Blunt Rochester.
So, Ms. Blunt Rochester, recent reports suggest that many state Obamacare markets are now facing a crisis. Right? Individuals are finding they cannot afford the new premiums, companies are finding they cannot make money on the markets, and they're pulling out. What is your assessment of the Affordable Care Act, and how would you make changes to either replace it or make it work better?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say that the Affordable Care Act, I remember not only when it passed, but also the Supreme Court ruling, thinking, this is big. This is part of President Obama's legacy, and this will be something that we will remember for a long time to come. I mean, it did some very good things in terms of making sure that people weren't treated unfairly because of pre-existing conditions and making sure that children up to age 26 were still covered. But at the same time, what we've heard from both employers and also individuals is that while we now have access for millions more people, where the challenge is on the cost side. And so number one, I think we should recognize that no law is perfect, but this one took us a long way, and that as your congressperson, it would be my job to try to help to make those improvements. Everything from allowing Medicare to be able to negotiate, to looking at what kind of prevention programs we have, because a lot more people have joined who were sicker. And so to me, part of that is working with the employer community, also working with the other stakeholders to make those changes to the current law and not repeal it.
Mr. Reigle, 1 minute.
Well, Obamacare in its present form has cost millions of Americans to lose the coverage they had, increase premiums for less coverage and higher deductibles than they had before. That is one of the number one things that I've heard about, that people have contacted me about. It's been detrimental in a huge way to small businesses, which are the backbone of America. Obviously, it's going to have to be repaired, reformed, or replaced. It's going to help bankrupt this nation further if it continues in the fashion that it is. I think interstate markets and free market policies can help reform that. That would be a first step. And obviously, we're going to have to think of a way to make it more efficient, and we're going to have to make sure that the 16 million new people that are covered under Obamacare and the pre-existing conditions remain.
Well, let's move to other entitlements as well as we follow up this conversation. In today's New York Times, the editorial board pointed out that Social Security and retirement have become invisible topics in the presidential election. In fact, neither have been mentioned in the first two presidential debates. We're fixing that here. What will you do to make sure that this issue is a priority? And I'll allow Lisa Blunt Rochester, you field this first, but remember, this is moderated discussion, so you may exchange views together.
Okay. Well, first of all, Social Security is probably goes down in history as one of those programs that has kept many people out of poverty. It is one of those things that was a contract that we made with our seniors and also people with disabilities, and so we need to maintain our part of the contract. I'm not supportive of privatization of Social Security, but I am supportive of looking at raising the income cap. I think that those who can pay more should pay more, and I think that will also have a big impact on the system. In addition, I mentioned with Medicare, the ability to be able to negotiate for prescriptions would be a good way also of saving some funding. But the goal has to be a commitment to ensuring that we still have Social Security.
The points you agree or disagree with?
Sure. Well, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare are about half of our budget right now and are increasing. Social Security is going to have to be looked at. We possibly may need to think of what is the poverty line for folks, and maybe they get a benefit that brings them up to the poverty line. There might be some means testing associated with Social Security, and we might have to, in a way that doesn't affect people who are getting ready to turn 65 and 70, possibly raise the partial and full benefit ages up over time to make up for some of that gap.
And I just wanted to add that AARP, one of our sponsors, has actually done a white paper on a host of different options that can be discussed in terms of strengthening Social Security. They've put the pros and the cons. And so for me, that's one of the organizations that you talk to when you're trying to make these kinds of decisions. And bottom line is we can't balance the budget on the backs of people who have already given so much to our country.
We're going to move on at this point. We're going to go from healthcare and entitlement programs to politics and personal issues. As James Dawson will have the very first question, and Mr. Reigle, you will have the initial response on this.
Mr. Reigle, one of the biggest complaints Americans have about Congress is that nothing seems to get done. Job ratings of Congress are abysmal, and few have any confidence things will get better. If elected, what specifically will you be able to do to change this?
Well, hopefully I'll do, as I mentioned earlier in Wyoming, where I reached across party lines. I've had to work pretty hard at everything I've gotten, so I would use my personality to try to reach across the aisle. I would try to spend as much time as I could in Washington and try to forge relationships there. I think, in spite of whatever happens in the presidential election, I do believe Congress will still remain Republican, so I would have a seat at the table there, and I think that would help Delawareans.
Let's move into the rebuttal. My apologies, yes.
I have to tell you, this is probably one of the things that excites me the most about running for Congress, is that people talk about that challenge of the culture and environment. And I always think back to a story when I was Deputy Secretary of Health and Social Services in Delaware, and we were one of a few states that didn't collect abortion data. And I remember having to get the two most right-wing and left-wing folks in the General Assembly to go on a bill and work with Planned Parenthood in the Archdiocese, and everybody agree that they would not put amendments on that bill because everybody needed the data. The state needed it, Planned Parenthood needed it, and so did the Archdiocese. We were able to pass that bill and nobody even heard about it. It didn't even make the newspaper. To me, it's about finding common ground and finding common sense solutions, and that's what excites me about going to Washington.
We're into the moderated discussion portion. I would like to pose a question to you because women make up only 19% of the U.S. House of Representatives in 2016, lagging far behind other countries. So if you were elected, what would you do to push forward women's issues?
That's a great question. First of all, I was fortunate to get the support of many women in our Delaware General Assembly who have already passed a package of great bills, everything dealing with equal pay, and had Lily Ledbetter here. As your congressperson, I think it's twofold. It's one, passing bills like equal pay for equal work in Washington, but it's also being able to prepare the generation to come and making sure that there are others that we are grooming to assume these positions.
It's moderated discussion. Does gender matter?
Well, it shouldn't matter, but my experience has not been in government. I mean, I've never been a paid politician or bureaucrat or anything like that. Mine has been the military. In the military, everybody earns the same pay grade. It depends on how many years you've been in, what rank you are. At the airline where I was at, it's what kind of plane you're flying. If you're flying a 747 or an Airbus, and are you the co-pilot or the captain? And there was no gender discrimination as far as pay goes on any level.
Mr. Reigle, Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump lost significant support from many GOP lawmakers over his comments suggesting he has forced himself on women, among other things. Will you vote for Donald Trump for president? And if so, what do you say to female voters offended by his comments?
Well, I cannot defend what Donald Trump said at all. I started the race way before Donald Trump entered the race. I have to say at this point, I'm still voting for Donald Trump, only because as a veteran, my anger with Hillary Clinton for things in Benghazi and possible erasing emails and so on and so forth haven't changed my opinion. But it's up to every person to decide who they're going to vote for.
Oh, I know you're not asking me if I'm voting for Donald Trump.
Well, then I will ask.
But I will comment on
I will
that.
say, then both of you did say that reaching across the aisle was important in this, but reaching across the aisle is useless without a willingness to compromise. So how will you decide when and how you will be willing to compromise with the other side and when you won't?
Do I get to rebut?
It is discussion, so you can.
Okay, because I think tonight, in a few minutes, there will be a debate on the presidential level. And the thing about this year, to me, that is so significant and about Donald Trump is that it's not just what he says, it's what he's done and what he's saying he will do. And when we talk about the Supreme Court and the impact that whoever is in this seat is going to pick that person, when we talk about tone and temperament and how you deal in a world that has, problems around it, we need leadership now. We need strong, positive leadership, not people who are going to separate us and divide us. And so
it is moderated discussion.
Well, I would say that both candidates have kind of blocked out the sun when it comes to issues this year. Words, I cannot defend the words he's spoken at all, but actions to me mean more than words. And to me, it's just unacceptable the things that have, taken place under Hillary Clinton's watch, and that's why I'm voting for Donald Trump.
And I would just say that Hillary Clinton has been a champion for families and children throughout the course of her life, and I think she would be a great president.
We are now moving into the portion of our debate where we take questions from the students and also online questions. So that does conclude our portion of the debate here. The first question is to Lisa Blunt Rochester, and it comes from Iris Kang, a junior environmental science major from the University of Delaware.
Climate change has been the worst that it's ever been, and we're at a point where we can't turn back. So my question is, if you were elected, what would you do about climate change?
Climate change is probably one of the most critical issues facing our world today. Everything from, particularly in Delaware, with sea level rise and what we're seeing down across our state, even having climate refugees in places such as South Bridge, Wilmington. For me, it goes again back to number one, acknowledging that we really are seeing that and that science matters. That's important. Number two, looking at new and innovative ways to gradually move us from fossil fuels to clean energy and good jobs. And the University of Delaware is a perfect example of a place where innovation like that is happening. And then there's also the things that we can do personally as citizens of our country in terms of being more environmentally friendly. That's important as well. So it's government can do some things in terms of tax credits and in terms of spawning innovation, but we also personally need to take responsibility as well.
You have a 1-minute response.
Sure. Well, if a policy isn't good for people, it's also not good for the environment. So I agree that the planet is warming. The causes of it, I'm sure, are related to man-made effects. I'm not exactly sure if it's tied to CO2 emissions. I actually had a UD, well, I know there's been some debate here at UD about the cause of it. I actually had a DuPont chemical engineer, retired PhD in chemical engineering, said that global warming was tied to human changes on the planet, man-made problems, but it wasn't tied to CO2. He said it was merely a coincidence that CO2 was correlated to the increase in these problems. We need to have a comprehensive energy platform, one that doesn't bankrupt a certain segment of our industry. I'm in favor of, I have solar panels, I'm in favor of alternative forms of energy as well.
All right, we're going to move on to our next question. This one will be going to you, and it's the issue of college affordability, and it comes from Aaliyah Jones, a senior political science major at Delaware State University.
Do you think college should be more affordable? And if so, what is your plan to make college more affordable other than lowering interest rates?
Well, I do wish that college was more affordable, and things like there are certain government programs that are taking money away from college education. I've always wondered, though, why don't they ever spend the endowments? Just asking, to lower the college tuition. But I think we need to work on that to make college more affordable. We could possibly change the way loans are given and structured to reduce them for students. I don't believe in free college, though. Not everyone needs to go to college. College is not the golden ticket to prosperity. I just talked to a guy who runs a welding shop, and he said he could run it 24/7 if he had more skilled workers in the trades. So I think colleges could also collaborate with some of the high schools and the trade schools to get college credit there.
You have a 1-minute response.
This one is personal for me as well because I have 2 children that graduated from Delaware public schools, went on to college, did the right things like most people, and now, like 40 million other Americans, are in debt. And one still living home with me because she's in debt. But I will say that interest rates, that is an important first step. I think supporting increases in Pell Grants is important, but I also think we need to look at spreading great programs like the SEED program that we have right here in Delaware. That is a great program that gets folks in the pipeline for school as well, and then also a focus on our community colleges. And I do believe we should aspire to have free college. I think it's an imperative, and if we don't have the aspiration, we'll never get there.
And you just mentioned your daughter who has graduated. What do you say to students who have already graduated and taken out an average of nearly $29,000 in student loans?
Yeah. You know, I tell you, one of the things is even just keeping their hope up that all of their paycheck, if they have a paycheck, won't go to paying the student loans. I think, you know, again, it really is everything from looking at the safety net and supports that you have around you to making sure that you are balancing your budget and doing the things that you need to do. But it's a challenging time right now for young people. As a matter of fact, I mean, one of the things for us as Delawareans is the concern that we're exporting millennials instead of bringing them to our state. And we need young people here to make us so that we have a vibrant economy as well.
Mr. Reigle?
So the SEED and INSPIRE programs are fantastic, but they're state programs. We were talking about the $20 trillion national debt. President Obama wants to give every kid 2 years of college. It's leading you down the path that, hey, if you just go to college, you're going to be successful. I've been campaigning since January 2015. I've met plumbers, electricians, welders. They all need help. You don't have to go to college. The free college program would just add billions more dollars to an already strained budget. It's a noble idea, but where does the money come from?
All right, we will move on now to an online question, and it concerns Social Security, and it comes from retired occupational therapist Katriana Binder-McLeod. She asks, on average, women get less in Social Security benefits than men because they earn less and take more time off to care for children, parents, and others. How will you address this when updating Social Security? Mr. Reigle, you are first on this one.
Well, I'm willing to look at anything related to reforming Social Security plans. So I wouldn't take anything off the table. I think it's great when a family has the ability for a parent to stay home, man or woman, and take care of the kids. That has a huge impact on I believe, on families and potentially on our society, and I think that's a good thing. I wouldn't take that off the table. I would look at a proposal that included some kind of credit for taking care of elderly or family.
And I've actually proposed that in our economic agenda for women and children, women and families. There are so many issues that touch women in particular in terms of equal pay for equal work, paid family leave. It impacts the whole family. That one woman is a part of a family probably that is also missing out on the revenue that could be coming to all of them. So I would support that as well.
You know, Delaware's congressional representatives have always worked together, regardless of their party affiliation. So what are one or two of the more important issues that you feel would require you crossing the aisle and working with the other party? And I'll allow Ms. Blunt Rochester to answer this first.
You know, I think one, or you mentioned one or two. One is dealing with gun violence. We still have not gotten there, despite the fact that people have been shot in movie theaters, in schools, in college campuses. We still haven't been able to come across the aisle, and I think that that's something that we can do together. I think there are a host of other issues as well, like infrastructure reform. Our roads and bridges really need to be rebuilt, and those are good jobs that would be right here at home, and it's an investment in our economy. So to me, that's another area where working with Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, I think we can come together and really rebuild the fabric of our country.
So I guess if Ms. Rochester wins, you wouldn't have that problem. You'd just be talking to Senator Coons and Carper. So I would be working with those gentlemen, and I respect them. I think two things for me off the bat. One would be Delaware always has a lot of beach replenishment issues as far as federal funding, so I'd have to work with those guys. Also, there's a lot of security issues. There's veterans benefits, and I would do anything. We have the VA hospital in Ellesmere, so I'd work on that with them. But also we have a lot of military things in Delaware. We have the Delaware Air and Army Guard at Newcastle County Airport, It's important to keep those bases strong and vibrant, and also Dover Air Force Base. We just had the runway rebuilt there, and I'd probably have to work with those guys on keeping Dover Air Force Base strong.
Mr. Reigle, if elected, do you have a House committee that you would like to serve on? Have you given that consideration?
Absolutely. The Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. My whole life, I've been flying in some form or fashion. I think I'd be the most experienced congressman when it comes to aviation and the aerospace industry in Congress. So I think that's a benefit to our nation. The aerospace industry is something America still leads at. It's over 5% of our gross domestic product, creates millions of jobs in America, and I think I'd be able to contribute there in a very meaningful way. And the other piece of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee is the infrastructure piece. The infrastructure, great job creator for our state and also our nation. So I would love to be on that committee and serve in those two functions.
Have you given this thought?
Yes, I have. There are two committees that are my dream committees if I were elected. One is financial services. Thousands of jobs are right here in Delaware that depend on us really making sure that we have a vibrant financial service industry, and that includes everything from independent small banks and credit unions to our larger banks. The other one that I am interested in is energy and commerce. I think that it's probably one of the most diverse committees. It deals with everything from health to Bitcoin. It also would be something that is futuristic and would help us as we're looking at the jobs of today and the jobs of the future for our state and for our country.
All right, well, that wraps up our time for tonight's questions, and we want to give you each an opportunity to have a closing statement. Mr. Reigle, you have the first opportunity for a 1-minute closing statement.
Well, tonight went very quickly, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak to Delawareans tonight. Thank you so much. You've gotten to hear some differences between my opponent and I, and it's up to you. You're smart, you're the voter, you can make the choice. Whenever I've been asked to step up, I have for our nation, whether it's been as a veteran in the military, flying, Patriot missile systems into Israel, flying tank parts, our tanks into Mogadishu when our troops are pinned down. I've done it. I believe in a strong America, a secure America. I believe we need to take care of our veterans. I don't think Delaware should become a sanctuary state. I'm humbly asking for your vote November 8th. Thank you for the privilege and honor to be a Republican congressional candidate on November 8th.
Lisa Blunt Rochester, your 1-minute closing statement.
Well, I want to first thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Hans, for a civil, beautiful debate before the next one that is coming on in a few minutes. And I really just want to say to the voters, thank you, first of all, for those who voted for me in the primary. It is humbling and incredible. We have a choice right now in our country in the direction that we're going to go. Are we going to build walls or are we going to build bridges? Everyone up and down this state has said to me that what they liked about this campaign was that we focused on real issues, jobs and the economy, but also about bringing people together. And that's what my candidacy is about. There's a proverb that says, sticks in a bundle are unbreakable. When they separate us, we're easy to break. But when America comes together, they can't break us. So I ask for your vote on November 8th and send me to Congress. I'm excited to be there and to serve you. Thank you.
Candidates, I want to thank you very much for taking this time and discussing the issues with us. I look forward to your digestion of the information tonight, but I think your information might be more directed to the follow-up debate to this one as chair of the Political Science and International Relations Department. But I want to thank you as well for being here on our panel. And James, you were taking notes, so I'm sure that through Delaware Public Media, we will be seeing more stories coming from you in reference to this election and to these candidates right up until Election Day. Thanks to all of you, and I want to thank the audience here at Mitchell Hall. I am Nancy Karabjanian, and on behalf of Delaware Public Media and the University of Delaware Center for Political Communication, thank you so much for joining us, and good night.
Delaware Debates is a joint initiative of the University of Delaware's Center for Political Communication and WDDE 91.1 FM Delaware Public Media, with support from AARP Delaware. and from the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network and the William P. Frank Foundation of Delaware.